Good evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery, Season 9, Episode 11, where we are joined by John Bultena to talk about how RPGs work, what they can tell us about ourselves and the world. Welcome to the stream, John. It is great to meet you and to have you here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem at all. Now, as always, we have loads of pre-submitted questions from our patrons and our Discord community, which we will get into. But if you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask John, please do pop them in the chat. As always, Andy Leask will be putting some links in the chat. And John has also just shared with me a discount code for his Cauldron and Tower shop, yes, which we will share on the Discord server afterwards. Oh. It's valid throughout the week, so please do check that out when we share the link on there. Right, John,
hey,
tell us about yourself.
That wasn't one of the pre-approved questions. Yeah. Hi, I'm John Bultena. I live in California in a far-off land called the United States. That's very weird. And I live in a very rural area. I grew up here in this small town called Merced. It's very agriculturally driven. We grow a ton of almonds. If you guys like almonds, you're probably eating our almonds wherever you are in the world, although that may change soon. And I teach at the University of California Merced. We just got R1 status. We literally just got R1 status this last semester. We're very proud of that. And part of the University of California system, so like UCLA, UC Davis, Berkeley, Cal, or what you want to call it, we're part of that system. There I teach. I am formally in the writing program as an instructor, but I have gotten roped into teaching these GE courses, and mine is on tabletop role-playing games, and I've been teaching that now for 6 years, and it is all I teach now. I call it how to build a gilded cage for yourself, because it was kind of the dream I wanted to do, and now it's all I do, and I don't know if I'm not complaining, but I am.
One of my best friends from school is associate professor of philosophy at UC Davis, funnily enough, in the Californian system. So, do you know, when I was looking at your bio, I didn't Google it, I should have done, but I was trying to work out what Merced was short for. My brain parsed it as University of California Merced, education or something. I didn't realize it was the actual town, and now you said it, I'm like, it's so obviously it's the same name Spanish, as Mercedes, right?
It's Spanish for mercy. When the Spanish is, because it's named after the local river. So if you ever go to Yosemite, big gorgeous national park, the river that flows through that is the Merced River, and it's called the River of Mercy basically because the Spanish explorers were basically dying. And then they found water in the river and mercy. And so that's, same thing with we have a town called Mariposa up here, which is gets name checked in the original Fallout game, actually. And it's named Mariposa means butterflies, because the river was full of butterflies. So everything's got names for they're not named after great warlords or kings. They're named after basically what did I see and how did I feel when I saw the river for the first time?
And how did you lots of when we shared that you were coming on, a lot of people were quite excited that there was such a thing as a professor of TTRPGs. Right. So how did you get into teaching TTRPGs and further education? Was it through writing? You taught writing first?
Well, yeah, I've been teaching English and writing for a long time. I've been teaching now for 20 years at college level, and the tabletop role-playing game class came about because we had a GE kind of a shift in our GE programs at the school. We used to have this much more shotgun approach to education called core, which was basically a little bit of everything for GE course. And we basically couldn't sustain it anymore due to the school got too big. We didn't have the facilities to do it. And so we went over this class called Spark. And the formal title of my class is Spark 1 Dungeons and Dragons Skills IRL. That's the literal words that appear on their transcripts. And we could propose our own version of Spark. And it basically, the premise of the class is it's to develop students' curiosity capacities through interdisciplinary means. And then while they get access to an expert on a specific topic. And so there's some on sports statistics, there's some on being inclusive and innovation. My original one was actually on social media and society, and the tabletop role playing game was kind of in the back of my mind, and I wanted to see how the classes actually work before I jumped into doing the tabletop role playing game one, and then I just kind of shot it, and we did it, and I developed it, and it's been really good, honestly. So it's kind of through just like wondering if I could pull something off and then pulling it off.
And we'll get into it a bit later, but there are a few patrons who are teachers who are using TTRPGs as tools with their, Andy Leask included, but a couple of other patrons who've been chatting about it on our Discord server of varying ages and varying levels of complexity. So that'll be interesting to get into, because I know you don't necessarily play the TTRPGs with your students. You're not using it as a teaching tool like that. But yeah, some of our patrons are.
What's so interesting about that is I look back at my own education, and my 8th grade teacher actually he didn't call it a role-playing game, but we actually did play one in class essentially for about a month. And but it was a role-playing game where we were, it was to teach civics. So each person was like a household in the city. We had a map of the city, and we had to like deal with like the ramifications of like different actions by different people in the city. And we played that for like a month, basically doing like a turn every like 2 or 3 days, I think it was. It was kind of interesting though, but like it showed us how like basically if you're like a jerk in like your local city, stuff will happen to you, or like it won't go in your favor, or how to like get things to change that you want to change. So it's a good way to teach civics.
Yeah, kind of like Model UN.
Yeah, Model UN. It's Model UN for like, but for a town.
But for a town,
mean, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in a debating club at school, and I found that really useful in my adult life for like thinking about the logical like empathy with other people's arguments, because in debating, in the parliamentary style debating that we were getting taught, that was sponsored by the trade unions to kind of like bring the next generation of like young people into politics from state schools, you know, you get given a topic, and that topic is usually something controversial, or sometimes at Christmas it's something fun, like this house believes in Santa Claus, or this house believes, you know, teachers should bring back corporal punishment and stuff like that. And it was really useful and to look at the opposing sides of the argument, to construct them in a logical and like attractive way, but then also kind of walk away being like, yeah, but I think that's complete bullshit.
Oh yeah, you should be able to, I mean, I studied my undergraduate, my first time through grad school is philosophy, and part of the appeal of that to me was like understanding the opposite side at all times and being able to anticipate, and also like, you know, why would people, what are their presuppositions to getting to this point, and trying to see like the undermining logics they have. Not necessarily what they think, but how they think about it is very important. Yeah.
So here's one of our pre-submitted questions from Martine. What are your views on using RPGs to help players understand different social structures or real world situations?
That is interesting. So I actually think that they are different social structures in real world situations. I think they just do. I think that like these games are a social structure. But I mean, you can also do it where like you're trying to like posit out that something is like, I don't know how to put this, like what a potential social structure is. This is a really open-ended question to me. So I'm not sure how to grab onto it initially. I think it can show you how something might work. Like you could posit like what would like you know, if you want a really like crappy example, but like how like an anarcho like, you know, local system could work for like, you know, trade and everything. I mean, you can posit whatever kind of social structure you want to and actually like try to simulate it in a game and everything. But I think that what more of the social structures that they help you understand are more subtle in terms of how you're actually playing with people and working with people. So there's like, you can have the content of the fantasy be where you're trying to like do the social structure, but you can also, but there's literally also is a social structure in terms of playing the actual game as well, and organizing and all that kind of stuff, all the meta that goes on around the game. So I think that like, I mean, as far as my view on it is, yes. I mean, it exists. Like it can. This is a really open question, but I think it's something good to think about is that these games are fundamentally socially structured, and that's kind of their appeal.
We've had some situations on like Lawhammer or Actual Play, but in our own games where we've explored things that you'd never really be in this situation in real life. It's unlikely in real life you'll be with a high-ranking politician. Well, you might be. Like I've given evidence in the Scottish Parliament, but that was in a very different structured, lower stakes situation. In a high stakes situation, you're in with people who are quite powerful. And we've learned some things about ourselves in how we interact with power in the modern day is very different to how we might have had to interact if we were in different situations. Like, for instance, a few weeks ago, just in a situation where we felt constantly like we needed to be polite and be liked, and it was the exact opposite thing that we needed to do in this particular situation. And I found that quite like revealing. I found it quite useful to be in situations and practice for real world situations that are both lower stakes because they're not heads of state or religious leaders, but higher stakes because they are my real life. It's my real career now. So I find those quite useful.
Yeah, no, I think that and this goes to like a core element of how the games like fundamentally work in terms of like the cognitive and social structures that we have that do it, that there is no like I'll go on this too. There is no sheer fantasy. Like there is no pure fantasy that doesn't exist because we always bring something to it, but we always bring something out of it too. So yeah, that is an interesting element of it too. Is I think it can help us understand by all means. And everything. So, all right, what's Bultena got here to say? Sort of
specific about it. It's a follow-on from Martin's, but quite specifically about the safe space. So Zoltan asked, do you think TTRPGs provide a safe space to explore parts of ourselves we might not otherwise express in daily life?
Yeah, that's actually that's actually something my students read about. Is we look back to, and I'm guilty of this, of the kind of puerile teenage boy play version of RPGs where you're going out. No, seriously, no, legit. And like that, what irks me is that gets dismissed. Like, oh, that's a bad way to play. That's not a good way to play. And this is like where you're going around and you're like, stabbing shopkeeps and, you're murder hoboing across.
Murder hoboing around.
Murder hoboing across. That's like, or engaged in like sexualized violence in these games as a teenager and everything. And I don't think that is necessary. That kind of play was really got pointed to a lot in the Satanic Panic as being the problematic elements of it. But it's not that's necessarily. I don't view that as necessarily like at that age, especially necessarily a bad thing. I think that it can be a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, but it's a growth point for people that they're trying to understand. Especially like young men are trying to understand. Like, well, okay, I'm a man. Here's what I think manhood is being violent and mean and being a jackass and all this kind of stuff. But the thing of the game, if you want the game to sustain, if you want to keep on playing the game, you have to be cool with everyone else playing around, including the game master, including the other players. So you're gonna like people that I had a guy I used to work at a game store out of college. We had a guy that played games like that still, and he was like in his like late 20s, early 30s, and no one wanted to play with him. And so what it came down to was that he kept on playing that way of the game, and it wasn't a sustainable way to play the game. But he didn't really caught the lesson that I did at a younger age, that that's not a way that people want to play actively or engage, and it's not going to help me grow my social circle. So I think that like exploring that element of like, well, I'm not sure what it is to be like in the case of myself, to be a man, I'm going to be like violent and stupid at these games. I learned quickly that that's not what that is. That's not a sustainable method of it. And so I think that yes, they can provide a safe spot for that. But when you see when you see a kid talking about playing that way and you deter it, instead of saying, well, why do you want to play that way?
Yeah.
What is it about that's appealing to you? Why play, Doom and everything? And don't get me wrong, it's, violent video games are fun as hell, but like it's that I think that we overlook that and we dismiss that. And it's one of my problems with like kind of issue I take issue with some contemporary tabletop role-playing game community elements, is that they're really against that. And I'm like, okay, well, is it that these people are inherently violent, or is it that they're just like not sure what it is, and they're using the game to explore that element of something they felt or they think or an impulse they had?
Yeah.
And I feel like just suppressing any of that is like the worst thing you can do.
Yeah,
completely Chris-resting
and why does the community think that they have the right to gatekeep and censor other people's fun and experience of the game?
And part of that too is that, like, I don't know if there's a gatekeep, but also I think that they also, like, it creates a deterrence from the community that, like, oh well, like, I clearly wasn't wanted then, so will I be wanted in the future? But it also creates like I think there needs to be a little more compassion from that. But I always go back to, like, one of the owners of the store I worked for. We were playing Magic the Gathering, and he did something in the game you can't do. And I was like, you can't do that. And he's like, you need to understand something, John. The rules are just a manufacturer's recommended usage. They're not. That's and so I always go back to that. Is like, this is just how we'd like you to play this way, or I'd like you to do it this way, or I have this intent. But as far as what you actually do with it is a different story. But no, I think they can certainly explore a part of ourselves, and you see this in, like, tabletop role playing game therapy. You see this especially in early cases of it, that people can kind of try these things out and then see how it's not sustained. But if a kid, like, if I'm playing with a kid and they do something like grotesque in the game, I'm not going to tell them no, but I'm going to have them see ramifications of that.
Yeah, consequences,
and I'll become aware of it to some degree. And I think that's one of the beauty of it. It's less about seeing that part of ourselves, because we are seeing that part of ourselves. It's more about seeing the ramifications of, should we try to engage in that action? And that, I think that's where the real value is there. I have no idea if that was a good answer. Was that?
No, it was great.
Okay? Was that acceptable?
Absolutely.
But,
yeah,
okay.
Totally
Do I pass?
acceptable. You've passed. You win the stream. So Martin asks, do you agree that playing characters from diverse backgrounds can help real life player empathy?
I don't know about that one. Like diverse backgrounds, like, I'm not sure what they mean by diverse backgrounds. Like, is it diverse? Because we had all this before the stream was about like how diversity is a very broad term, and we often have a very narrow definition of diversity. So, like, are we talking about diversity of, like, oh, I played a noble in this game, and the next game I played a peasant? Like, that's a diverse element, or is it more of like trying to get, like, other cultures and such into the games? What's interesting about that is I had this semester we had Sen-Fung Lim, who game creator, who's one of the co-creators of Jiangxi Blood in the Banquet Hall, which is a game about, for those who don't know, is about you play members of a Chinese immigrant family in San Francisco in the early 20th century, who run a restaurant by day and then at night fight monsters. And but in the game you play a Chinese immigrant regardless of who you are. That's and that the way the game kind of works in the stat blocks is really interesting. But the game comes like a primer on how to what the experience is like, and he actually encourages it because he's hoping like it makes people understand the immigrant experience. That's especially that specific immigrant experience. But I think it whether or not you're playing like a character that's like opposite of you or different than you, I think it's more about how you actually interact in the game with the elements and such. And so I'll be honest, I actually think you'd benefit more from playing with diverse people, actual real people, versus diverse like backgrounds of the game. Because I mean, you can have like diverse backgrounds, like quote unquote diverse backgrounds in the game, but then I can't. Can I talk shit on like certain games? Okay, I can't.
You can do whatever you
because like if you could like if you don't have diverse people playing your game, but you keep on wanting to do diverse stuff in your game, you end up with like rifts. Like you end up with like really problematic stuff. So okay, I guess I see him getting the nod. So apparently I can talk on that game a little bit.
Yeah, I've talked before about like bigotry safaris. I'm not interested. Like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in a GM coming and being like, "Come on my bigotry safari," because like we all come to games with a real life experience. That's like hard, and maybe it's easier for me because I've got the privilege of having white skin than it is for someone who has brown skin. Absolutely. I don't dispute that, but I come with my own baggage, and going on that GM's bigotry safari can sometimes be like really wearing. You're like, I don't want to be told I can't do that in a game because you've decided that in your world you don't allow women to do that. Like, I'm not interested in that. I am interested in like interesting world building, but it comes back to what you're saying about it's the manufacturer's recommendation. So I see people online, like fans online of all sorts of properties being like, well, you can't do do that because in the original books, blah de blah de blah de blah, Star Wars was really white. Yeah, because it was made in the 70s. Like,
yeah, and everyone was like from the UK.
Exactly.
I should mention. Star Wars is interesting because I should mention like I'm from where George Lucas grew up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he grew up down the road. Modesto is where he's from, and so like it's kind of funny because like some of the people that he in his production in early like Industrial Light and Magic and everything, and he was pulling from here. So like it was funny because growing up at high school, we would have like the career day. And like some of the people would be like, yeah, like, you know, I work in like this, you know, whatever field. And by the way, I was an X-Wing pilot in New Hope. And they can point to themselves like there's like small piece of the frame, but they were just some buddy that helped on the movies. It's always funny. Yeah.
So thinking, we've got some comments coming in.
Sure.
There's a question in the comments. So Benjamin asks, how is it that the reactionary strand, the RPG hobby survived despite the ways in which creative practice in the hobby seem to be opposed to that strand?
Because they're not opposed, because there's a market. I mean, flat out, there's a market. Like we may not see it online, and just because we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's actually like the number one problem with like the number one misconception is that like, well, okay, like there's diverse voices, and like it used to be that we didn't see those voices, but now like there are like, you know, there are like pockets of whatever you're into. There's a pocket for it on the internet, and so like, you know, the question is like, why was like to get into it a little bit, but like why did like Varg from Berksham develop a role-playing game in the last few years? It's like because there was a market for it. Like that's what it comes down to. Like it doesn't matter. Like just because we see like the mainstream version of it going this way doesn't mean there's not like a pocket beneath the surface that goes against that. And I think it's better to acknowledge, like, I think one of the we talked about this a little bit earlier with being debate and everything, but like acknowledging the opposition is really key. And I think you create more opposition by not acknowledging them. Like, what is their grievance and everything like that. So like, why do people play this game? Because it appeals to them somehow. Like, why do people play like the bigot safari? Because it appeals to them somehow. But then like, are we also just making them feel bad because they play bigot safari and then we don't want everyone to play with them, or we don't want to try to like reach out to them or something like that? That's a different story, and how we do that, and whether or not you do that, and at what point do you like, is someone far gone, is another question entirely. But no, I mean, I think there is a major part that people are like, yeah, I want, the cons are very embracing. They want everybody because they want your money. Like, let's be clear, like the companies, they want your money. If you want to, yeah, it's such a weird thing. I got, you know, I'm a big music fan. I buy a lot of music from all over the world. Like I have a big record collection, and you get like, I get friends that are like, you know, these like bigots listen to my music and everything, and they know who they are, and it's kind of like, well, can you stop them or not? But it's like, well, I can't. But same thing with role-playing games, I can't stop them from playing that if they want to do it that way. But you know, it's yeah, it's such a, but you can play, that's a problem with being able to play it how you want to play it, is it is open up, it is open in that regard, you know?
Yeah, I agree with Mark here. So bigotry can certainly be a part of world building, of course it can, but I guess the thing is just to not make that bigotry a defining constraint on player experience. Yeah, what I'm talking about, Mark, is people importing bigotry from the real world that they're maybe not impacted by, and then being like, it's just part of the world, it's not my fault that you're a character with brown skins being penalized. Like, sorry.
There was an interesting element to one of the questions you previewed me earlier that kind of ties into this. Is my home game of D&D. There was kind of like this kingdom, and basically they have like various land graphs. I did kind of I built the world kind of around like a combination of like German, and then I incorporate German, kind of like the way the German nobility and fiefdoms worked to some degree, and then or the nation states kind of work, and then I kind of incorporated this whole area that was, for lack of a better term, was kind of drew a lot on Estonian folklore, and they were kind of being integrated, but then there was like bigotry against them to some degree because, well, they don't worship the same gods as us, and we're kind of having to like, but we need them because like they feed us and like feed our military. And one of their leaders, he seemed to be a pretty cool hero at one point, but you know, we don't like that they engage in ancestor worship and don't worship our official like gods. And so it was, you know, it's kind of interesting in that regard, and thinking about and that was certainly was an exploration of my own even like personal experience coming from a rural area, you know, where we grow food and everything, and people being like, oh, you're just, you know, a bunch of cow-tipped hicks. And it's like, well, no, we're, you know, there's some, you know, some of us, you know, do stuff beyond that. And it's interesting to think about, yeah. Okay.
So Andy Leask asks, are there any of your students' research questions that you think are particularly interesting or that surprised you?
This semester, there have been a few. The immigrant experience thing was actually really big this semester, in terms of how like the Jiangxi really ringed with one of my students who's Chinese American, and he was really interested in going into like how immigrant experiences work with role-playing games, or how immigrant community, he's interested in how immigrant communities can use role-playing games to help like integrate into like societies. That was pretty cool. I get a lot that want to do applied RPGs for therapy, and that's actually the very like common one I get the most of. And what I have to do with that, the main work I have to do with students on that is like, one, I'm like, therapy for what? And therapy for whom? Like, who is getting the therapy? What age? Because like the way you treat like autism, for example, or you deal with someone who's autistic, it depends on what issue you're handling. I had an ex-girlfriend who was like this guy, oh, we're talking about autism and like developing communication skills. I'm like, I had this girlfriend that was autistic, and like her communication skills were not the issue. Like it was not, she was not restrictive in what she had to say to anybody and could openly communicate quite easily. She had other things going on. So like we need to make sure that we narrow down like what we're talking about, and even look at the age groups that we're talking about too, because the way you treat like depression in like, you know, a 13-year-old, it's very different than you treat like a 50-year-old.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. So my first degree's in psychology. So like a lot of my work at uni was on psychological therapies. And what people maybe don't realize about psychological therapies is they've had decades of academic research to bring CBT to where it is today, to bring psychodynamic therapy to where it is today. So when someone says, I want to use like TTRPGs as therapy, I'm totally with you. I'm like, okay, do you want to use it as a tool in a setting that's already an established therapy that is appropriate for this illness, or are you just kind of out there in the Wild West uncovering patients' trauma in a way that's really kind of worrying, and it maybe won't help those patients? So I
got one. This semester I have a lot of trans students this semester. I think I have, out of my 90 students, I think I have like 5 trans students. And they were really interested in the class because we talk about a lot about the satanic panic and kind of look at analysis of it. And they one of the things I do talk about is how like one of my biggest problems with conspiracy theorists is that they're not original. Like they're really like they this rehash blood libel over and over again. It's really boring. And so look at the satanic panic is kind of nice because it's a panic over people that are, you don't have like protections as a D&D player. Like you have protections like for gender discrimination, race discrimination, you got protections. Religion discrimination, you got protections. As a D&D player, you're not protected under U.S. law. I don't know how things are in the UK, but like
no,
here
you're not protected under the 2010 Equalities Act. You are not protected as a TTRPG player.
Yeah,
I can confirm.
And so that to me is kind of cool because we can actually like more openly talk about how discrimination works and how misinformation works and have a lot more fun with it. And so one of the current like moral panics over here in the States, and I'm sure you've heard about it, is like drag queens in the library. And it's like, you know, and looking at the misinformation about that. And then we kind of look at, my students are kind of looking at satanic panic and looking at how like transphobia, what we can basically learn from the satanic panic and how current moral panics are operating too. And look at the playbook basically and help like anticipate it and then make it like better. So that's a cool question. I have some students looking at that too, which is really, really neat. That's been a fun one. I've had some students do some great statistical analysis of different like tabletop role-playing games, looking at like how they what kind of statistical models they use and why they use it. I am personally right now like a much bigger fan of bell curve games. That's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of D&D right now is I don't like linear probabilities. I like bell curve probabilities because that's like, you know, how things really work. And so that's why I like playing the Green Ronin's the Age games, the Expanse,
Yeah,
as my special game, because it's 3d6, so it uses a bell curve distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone pulls off like an 18, it's like, oh, that's a big deal. Like you congratulations, that's hard. But you have that really good middle to work in. It's like, oh, this is gonna be not too bad. And if you have skill in it, you're not gonna fail. Like your chances of failure are minimal. Oh yeah, you got to roll for your character who's good at this. You have to roll like a 5 or lower on 3d6 to fail. It's like, okay, that's pretty comforting.
That's hard. Yeah,
that's hard. Yeah. No, if you fail, you deserved it. The type of situation. So
yeah, regular viewers will know that Andy Law, who's our mechanics guru, is absolutely obsessed with the maths of any game, and would be, if he was here, he'd be cheering you on, John, in that bell curve versus linear, I think. Just to explore a little bit that you touched on, Zoltan asked, do you notice differences in how groups from different cultures or backgrounds approach role playing, or indeed the study of TTRPGs?
Yeah, my institution is we are a Hispanic serving institution, so it means that over to have that designation federally in the United States, you have to have at least, I think it's 25% of your student body has to be Hispanic. My institution's 54%. And then we're also, and it's Anapissi, I think it is how you say it. It's Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institution. And so I think to have that designation, you have to be like at like 12 or 10%, and we're at 25%. So like I get pretty diverse bodies. As far as like people from different cultures and how they feel about it, a lot of my students have never heard of this stuff, or they've only heard of it through like maybe video games. And that's actually a big issue I have to fight with, is like that, like I get students that don't understand this. We're not talking about video games. Those are very different. And so I've seen like a lot of different approaches to it. As far as how different cultures approach it, I don't know if like I see anything in that regard, like specificity. But what I do see that's really interesting to me is like notions of representation are really interesting in how that's approached. And I'm really interested in how representation. I think one of the problems I have with like the way that people approach representation is they try to like make it happen versus like finding those moments where it happens. And so I have this really funny story from a few years back where I had these two students in my class, two ladies, both are African American, and we were talking after class, and they said it was really cool in the class to read about like feeling represented in the history we're reading. And I'm like, well, we're reading about Gary Gygax. Like, what do you mean? Like, what you feel represented by Gary Gygax? So I go, yeah. And I was like, okay, you back up for a second, like because you're living in California, you're African American, Gary's from Midwest, like different thing. What's the representation? Well, they basically said we're Jehovah's Witness, and we've never actually read about a Jehovah's Witness historical figure except for like basically like Prince or like the Jacksons or something like that. So it's kind of cool to see like in an academic setting to like actually read about a Jehovah's Witness, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. You found representation. Not one I was thinking about, and I didn't think about that, and that's kind of cool. And I think that that's a really interesting element of how, like, I think the diversity can happen, just kind of emerge, and it's really powerful when it emerges like that. And that was a really powerful moment for me. And that one still sticks with me. Is like, oh yeah, I told him, I was like, you're right. I'm trying to think about my own personal education. And anytime I've read about Jehovah's Witnesses, and it hasn't really been like about historical figures that I could really name, aside from Prince. But that's Prince.
I didn't even know that Gary Gygax was a Jehovah's Witness. So like I wouldn't have known that was.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know Prince was either. Clearly,
Prince.
My Jehovah's Witness history.
Prince was like big, man. Prince and the Jacksons were big, but yeah, Prince would still go door to door up. I mean, even after he was famous, he would go door to door to do his missionary work and everything. But Gary, some of his earliest publications are in Jehovah's Witness journals. And he, Gary, it's interesting. I believe he converted for his wife, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but I'm not sure. But I believe he converted later in life. Yeah, this is before D&D, but he was, because he was like his early mid 30s when he did D&D, so he was not a young man when he started that. So I gotta give him that. I gotta give Gary this. He pulled himself up after having a bad go of it in his earlier life, but he's an interesting guy in a lot of regards. But yeah, No, yeah, but yeah, I mean, think about like the number of Jehovah's Witnesses you've ever read about in history classes, and I can tell you, it's like
I haven't.
You could do it on one hand. If you could do it on more than one hand, I'd be impressed. Because
I certainly can't.
You clearly had a better education than I did in that regard. So, yeah.
So Zoltan asks, do you see the medium becoming more widely recognized in academic circles for its value beyond entertainment?
Yes, and this is the entertainment elements. Something that really bothers me, and this is something we talked about when we look at the Satanic Panic. Is a lot of, because we read this book, Dangerous Games, by Dr. Joseph Laycock out of University of Texas Austin. That's about basically like what imagined worlds and but basically what like RPGs have to like get us to say about religion and make us think about religion. And he's a religious studies guy. And one of the problems he kind of talks about is, he's like, basically, like the moral panic people, the people in bad Patricia polling, they get these games wrong. He's like, but at the same time, the people that like are making them and are apologizing saying it's just escapism, it's just fun, also get it wrong. And I think that when people look at these as just entertainment, which don't get me wrong, they are entertaining. I'm not saying that's not a primary focus, and that certainly is the reason why we get into them. But I think that like when we start realizing how big these things are, and what they reflect and what they can tell us about both ourselves and things around us, I think is where it gets really interesting. Because one of my big things in my class I'm fascinated by, and we really do, is like how these games like function. It's not so much the games themselves; it's more about how we function up here. I have to ask my students. One of the questions I ask them is like, do you need a chessboard and chess pieces to play chess?
I would.
You would, but I've seen people that can play it in their head.
Yeah.
Like you and I right now.
I would, but someone else might not need to.
Why, and why do we need that? Well, what's the chessboard? The chessboard is just an information storage device.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll give you an easier one. You and I could play tic-tac-toe in our heads really quickly. It wouldn't be hard to play a game of tic-tac-toe, right? That's simpler version. But like, do we need a piece of paper? No. So the game isn't just this thing on paper. It's not just this book. It's not this physical thing. It's this activity in our heads that we kind of produce. And so, if you ever watch like someone that plays like multiple chess games simultaneously, they're actually usually playing them all in their head. They don't really need the board. Like they're at that kind of level. And so to me, there's like this function that we can engage in, and I think that's much more revealing. And I think that once you kind of understand that element of it, that how it is up here, I think that's where when you talk about therapy and everything, then we can really get into it and have a better understanding, make that much more effective, especially when you're talking about CBT or that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, when the Mars mission was first being talked about seriously, so like early 2000s, and there was a few articles I read that were genuine, like, but what would they do? Like, it's a 6-month or a 4-month voyage, and they wouldn't have the physical capacity to take all the entertainment they might need with them.
Yeah.
Like, what would they do? They couldn't have books, and obviously now you'd take a tablet or whatever, but then it was constrained by storage capacity. And I would read these articles and I'd be like, it's so obvious. You just teach the astronauts how to roleplay and they'll be like equipped to have like a whole world going on, a shared narrative in their heads that will distract them, entertain them, like compel them, like for that whole journey. To me, it was just like the most obvious thing that you would teach astronauts to cope with deep space flight.
Yeah, potentially. I also think that that's like an extreme example of isolation. I don't know how it would go, because I had some friends that were working up in Yosemite, and they got snowed in, and they had like 3 board games in the cabin they were snowed in, and from my understanding, they played Risk with each other for like 3 weeks straight, and I don't think it went over well. That's Risk.
I think it could have been worse. It could have been diplomacy, but
it could have been Monopoly. I mean, oh my god, the worst game in the world. I think with a compelling GM who had crafted, you know, a nice narrative arc, you could have a really good time on your mission to Mars. But
one of your questions in the chat was asking me like with QAnon, and actually interesting enough, like one way to understand, they're asking questions about like mainstream and splintering of QAnon and the like, and other like kind of moral conspiratorial thinking. The book we read, Dangerous Games, actually has been cited a bunch as a way to understand QAnon. And so that, sorry, I'm preempting your question here. But as far as it being a satanic panic, that is like trying to create like there is a new book that just came out. I'll put this in the private chat and feel free to do with it as you want here. But there is a new book that just came out called The Shadow Gospel: How Anti-Liberal Demonology Possessed U.S. Religion, Media, and Politics. And so this kind of notion of how like we use like the demons and everything to like kind of like blame stuff for these people are demons or whatever it is. And what it is just like, well, it's a demon. Okay, well then I can't. There's no more recourse. I can't prove it. I can't disprove it. I can't like. It's clearly evil. So like, what can I really do to combat that? So yeah, that book's really interesting. I haven't gotten that book yet, but I've read the previews because it literally came out like a week or two ago. So I haven't had time to read it because I got students. And but yeah, no, I don't think we're on the verge of one. I think we're in a series of moral panics. There always is a new moral panic. That's the thing. There's never like, how does the satanic panic end? And it's like there's a new moral panic. It gets satanic panic with D&D gets taken over by the super predator panic of the 90s. So you have like, inner city youth, gangster rap, all this stuff, which is then also symbolized like and lines up with the rise of Vampire the Masquerade, where vampire, you literally play the super predator of the earth. Like you are the apex of the earth. But then why does that go away? Well, then we have 9/11 and it's like, there's always some new thing to be scared of or whatever it is. And so, yeah, it just cycles through, and that's something I like to teach my students because they always ask, "How's it end? How's it end?" And it's like, well, it kind of like just peters off, and like there's something new to be scared of, and that's that's how it works.
Yeah, Maddie in the chat has Red Scare or Drug War or Lavender Scare, or War on Terrorism, or Japanese internment camps. You're totally right, Maddie. There's always something.
My town was one of the hosts of the internment camps, Japanese. Like there's a monument down at the fairgrounds. Yeah. Where I went and saw like people like do demolition derbies and breed pigs and do livestock sales. They interned Japanese during World War II. So I mean, like I that stuff's all very real, and I that's a big thing I try to get my students at the UC to understand is like we are not that far from history.
Yeah.
And we seem to think we are, but we're not. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like people feel like it's an inevitable march forward to some kind of progress, not realizing that certain rights, workers' rights, equalities were really hard won and require like care and protection to keep them. We saw that in the UK, so I think a lot of people in the UK didn't realise that a lot of our workers' rights were sort of inherited from the European Union, and a lot of the protections that we had in the UK were from the European Union, and in fact are the very things that the people who dislike the European Union would call red tape. Like it wasn't red tape, it was workers' rights, it was protection of workers. And I think
oh yeah, man, we're talking about like child labor laws and stuff like that in the South here in the US and Florida. It's absolutely unhinged. Exactly. I live in California where like it's a lot better. My wife is from Georgia, and it's a right to work state, so there's no teacher unions, and like everyone there was, oh, it's so bad a union. She got over like what was wild was that she had been teaching 10 years in Georgia, had won like basically a Teacher of the Year award like statewide, and then got here and was making double what she was making within her first job here, like easily. And it's like, yeah, because you got like all kinds of like, rights and stuff like that. So, but I feel like that's a different conversation.
Yeah, we've just covered this one because it came up naturally. So yeah, but is there anything you want to add?
So I will cite one of our most prestigious TTRPG UC alums, Mike Pondsmith. Cyberpunk was all about the anxieties of the time. What was wild about Cyberpunk for me was that I played it when I was in high school. It was the 90s. I didn't know Mike Pondsmith was black until like the early 2000s. I'd never seen a photo of him.
Me neither.
I'd seen like, I'd seen the name and I knew the book, but I'd never seen a picture of the guy. And then when I saw that was really, that kind of changed some things for me. But yeah, he went to UC Davis. That's a school he went to for his education. And then he worked down around Santa Barbara. But yeah, I mean, a game like that certainly did the time. Look at a game like Paranoia. Go look at like even contemporaneous games. Like you have a game like Transgender Deathmatch. I mean, that's that's a transgender person talking about like how they feel like they have like this kind of performative element. And so there's all these games do this stuff. It's not.
You mentioned vampire, and I always felt that Werewolf the Apocalypse was such a reaction to the nuclear scares of the 80s, but then the growing awareness of the ecological disaster that was like crashing down upon us, the hole in the ozone layer, etc. And I think in many ways, kind of that went away after 9/11. Like there was this building of it. And then it was taken over by other fears.
Well, that's why I think we saw the resurgence of vampire is like, you know, it feels like these oligarchs like run the world and stuff like that from elsewhere. And there's like people, kind of these hidden predators and everything too. And I think it deals with that anxiety. And then also like, you know, our own kind of conflicts of like, you know, it's like, like me personally, like I want to make a lot of money. And I had some great opportunities to make a shit ton of cash when I was going to school in LA or after school in LA. But I'm also like, I also kind of want to live with myself. Like I want to hold on to my humanity. And so I can see like vampire being kind of about that kind of like dichotomy of life and everything too. So I mean, absolutely. I think the games themselves could do that, but I think we could also do that with our games. So, like I could grab whatever game I want to play and explore those anxieties as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got strong views on cryptocurrency and choosing not to invest in that in earlier stages of my career, because I strongly feel that, maybe it was made with good intentions to disintermediate banks and central government, but actually it's a tool for money launderers and terrorists. Oh, yeah. And so, you know, not something I really want to profit off. But, sorry, that's the most controversial thing I said in weeks on Inside the Rookery. So therefore, like building on that, leading on from that, do you believe that TTRPGs can be tools for social change, or are they just mirrors and mirroring the anxiety of the times?
They're both. I mean, it is a mirror. Like so, if I go and play, if I'm a kid, I'm a puerile youth, and I'm like, you know, playing my murder hobo game, that functions as like a mirror of what I'm kind of worried about, my anxieties and such like that. But then at the same time, in that game, I can see that it's unsustainable. And then when I come back out of the fantasy, I'm pulling that back into myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is no sheer fantasy. Like there is no fantasies are completely fantastical. Like there's always like some element of reality touching on it, you know. No matter how, like we can try hard on it and try to get to abstractions, but there is some sort of like regression back to like a real thing that we can point to.
Mark, I've shortened this, so I'll add the context in my voiceover. So Mark said, to what extent is the revelatory aspect of TTRPGs, i.e. them telling something about ourselves, is it something that derives from game mechanics as opposed to conversation and dynamics around the table, or about the thematic setting that the game itself presents? And he did acknowledge that that's kind of an artificial division because you're playing the whole game at once, but he was curious about it.
I mean, mechanics can gear you towards stuff. I mean, like D&D gears you towards like killing stuff, because that's everything you get is like, oh, you leveled up, but you have a better way to kill stuff or survive combat. And so like what they reveal about you, the problem is that they're kind of, because they're so geared towards that type of game, it's gonna like, there's a value already inherent in the mechanics of it, you know. And that's why I think it's so hard to do like system neutral, like do a neutral system. It can be kind of tricky in that regard. I think as far as it revelatory, I guess it might reveal something about ourselves or things, but I think all these reveal different elements. But I also think because we engage in them, and there's that dialectic when we do engage with them, and we're playing these with other people. Generally, I'm actually hesitant to call solo role playing games like a role playing game. I'm actually very hesitant to do that because of like that. Like, I believe you can have a dialogue with yourself to some degree, but like it's also still like you're not. I think humans are fundamentally, we need to have other people, especially, and even like when you're in a community. You need that community to have like that community needs to reach out and like actually talk to other people out there besides just themselves, because otherwise you're going to get very you get like it gets bad. This is how you get all the toxic spheres and everything too. So but yeah, no, I to what extent, I mean, I think it depends on the situation.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about solo role-playing games, because I've thought a lot about TTRPGs through the prism of, in Scotland, along with many cultures, there's a strong tradition of oral storytelling, so folk storytelling. There's the National Storytelling Centre here in Edinburgh, and I've thought a lot about TTRPGs as the natural like successor, the descendant of the folk storytelling tradition. And I've often wondered how much more interactive folk storytelling would have been if we could go back to a time where that was the only entertainment you have. And it's not something I can like investigate because I can't go back there, but yeah, I've often thought about that. And it's interesting then to hear you say you don't feel TTRPGs can be solo, because likewise storytelling tradition isn't something that you do solo,
because you're
except
gonna
for practice maybe.
Well, you practice it, but then like you're going to react to the audience. You know, I mean, it's like a comedian that goes up and tells a joke that doesn't land, and then like they're going to tweak that joke because the reaction, there's a dialogue there with the audience. So I mean, if you're just doing what you want to do and you're not interacting with the audience or anything like that, or aware of the audience, then you're not going to get any further. But I also resist this notion that tabletop role playing games are like storytelling. I think they can be, and I think that's a major part of it. Like, I think majority of them are, but I don't think they necessarily have to be that kind of element. I think that like, you know, you just want to go and like kill everything in the marshmallow like A to Z. You can play that game, man. That's fine. If you need that. But like, I also think that like storytelling kind of emerges because of the nature of humans and all that kind of stuff too. That's in our situation.
Yeah.
Just we like to do that.
Yeah, I think we can acknowledge that TTRPGs, like any game, exist on a continuum of experience.
Oh, sure.
You can have fully rich storytelling, you can have completely mechanical, like dungeon bashing that unfolds like a Hero Quest type thing in the dungeon. That's still TTRPG in its own
Hero Quest
way.
is a great story, man. I love yeah. I was admiring the one you have on the behind you. I still have my original copy from when I was a kid, and then I got the new one that Avalon Hill Hasbro did, and I have a fully painted set of like
nice.
I
admire the commitment there.
Big, and I have all the expansions. I almost have them all painted, but I actually got into the way I got into tabletop role playing games was through we had a local hobby shop. It was called Hobby Castle, named after, we had an Air Force base here in town called Castle Air Force Base, and the guy that owned it was really big into RC planes and cars and everything. He was a World War II vet. And I would go in there with my mom because half the store was like craft stuff, so like popsicle sticks, glue, floral stuff, etc., fabrics, yarns, and the other half was like basically RC cars, RC planes, model planes. But then they also had like little miniatures, and I was really interested by the miniatures, and I wanted to paint some. And my mom got me some, and I learned to paint them. And then I found out there was a game you could play with them too, and so that's how I kind of got into Dungeons and Dragons. And so I've been painting miniatures for a long time, so I love that element. That's probably like painting miniatures is probably like the most British thing about me. It's it's always funny because like, you know, you got your stereotypes about people from England, but I'm like, they like to paint miniatures.
That's so funny because if you like, I just wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of painting miniatures as like a stereotypically. That's hilarious. Yeah, interesting.
It's so huge. Well, I mean, the whole industry. I mean, Games Workshop. Obviously,
yeah, for sure.
But I mean, it's like such a massive part of like that game. Like we talk about how big Wizard of the Coast is over here, but like, goddamn, I mean, people don't understand how many miniatures Games Workshop makes and how that spins out everything. And that is like one of the you know, like the Games Workshop has had a lot of influence on like cultures across the world in terms of a lot of things, but and even D&D, and the history of them, and like if you guys really want to get me to like really rant about something, ask me about Michael Moorcock at some point, but like and how he's the most stolen from person in the world now.
Well, we should have Andy on. Andy Law should be on because he's
there's a really good
like,
there's a really good interview where like people are asking like Moorcock about like, you know, this guys were influenced and, you know, these were influenced, and he's like, yeah, they're cool. And he's like, what do you think about like Games Workshop? And he's like, oh, there's thieves.
Yeah. Andy does Lore Beards with Lore Master of Sotek, and I think there's like an ongoing, like everyone has to take a drink when Andy Law says about how something was stolen from Moorcock. There you go. Moorcock mentioned Skull. You've done it.
Fair enough. Well, actually, my tattoos on my arm are the Stormbringer and Mournblade sword. So those,
cool.
A big fan. But anyways, go on. I'm sorry, I digress.
Moorcock wrote a really good essay about British fantasy literature, actually, that's really like excoriating.
Which
and
Epic
excellent.
Pooh?
Epic Pooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I got a bunch of his. I got a bunch of his like stuff on the. My Moorcock stuff's all over here, or I can point. This is all my Moorcock stuff over here, and then this is all my Lovecraft stuff, and my Expanse stuff, and then I have this is like my Japanese Kotobukiya Elric statue that was like from years back. Yeah. I got this is all like my ephemera, like and stuff. I'm in my game room right now.
You're in your
what we call the
game
dungeon.
room.
The dungeon, yeah.
So there's a couple of questions here that go naturally together, so I'm just going to bring them up together. So Zoltan asks, what can the characters and choices players make during a TTRPG reveal about them consciously or unconsciously? And the follow-up is, and have you ever seen players learn something important about themselves through play?
So the player thing is interesting because I just play with my friends, and maybe I don't know if they have or not. I can't really speak to that. Myself, maybe a little bit, but the first question about
I'll go back to it.
Go back to that one, yeah, was about during reveal about them constantly. There's some really good examples in this. When we read, like I said, we read Dangerous Games, and there's an example of this kid, and I totally forgot his name in the book, but basically, it's an early example of kind of using D&D for therapy. And what it is this kid's like having like problems. He's kind of like, this is the early 80s. He's kind of like violent. And they like the therapist plays a D&D game with him. And is like basically in the game, he creates this scenario where there's like a local like wealthy lord, and the lord has like sons, and the guy kind of infiltrates the lord's family and like kills the sons and like connives a way to steal like the lord's money. And basically, like they kind of ask, like the therapist asks, "Well, where'd you come up with the story from? Where'd you hear this?" And the guy's like, "Well, it's kind of based on like my relation with my dad. Is like I feel like my dad gives my brothers money, doesn't give me money, and he hoards stuff." And it was kind of interesting. So he's showing this revealing of it. So like I think we can do and I don't think he consciously created that story initially, this kid, but like he becomes conscious of it later. Is kind of an element, and so you might be able to see where things are. And you can do this kind of dream analysis stuff with it if you want to, but. I see some people playing it very like they're trying to like actively learn about themselves, and other times we're just trying to like I'm just trying to have a fun time.
Yeah.
So and maybe but it does reveal like what you think is fun too as a religion element too, and like why you would keep on coming back. So like I think there always is something revealed. Once again, there's no sheer fantasy. There's no sheer like just this is just stupid fun. It's like no, there's something to it too.
Yeah. And Martin asks, what do you think the greatest strength is of TTRPGs over other media for teaching us about ourselves?
All right, so this is going to be this comes out of actually reading Moorcock's essays, especially his essays on Tolkien. I think that what they do is they provide a method of media that is not fascist fundamentally, and it's very difficult to be fascist with. So like the book is done. Like the book is a little Hegelian too, but the book is done. Like it's there, it's complete. There's a front and a back to it, and I can go in and mark it up, but I can't change that the words, or I can't change the person. I have to acknowledge that, and I think that with like these games, because of the way they work, no one plays rules as written. Like no one ever plays rules as written. No one plays the scenario exactly how it is. And I think that like that is a really big strength of it. I go back and I use the example a lot of like Fallout 3. Fallout 3 had this ending where like you have to go and die. Like it's been out for a year. I'm going to spoil it for everybody, but like you have to go in like this reactor and you have to die because of the radiation poisoning, right? But at the same time, you have like a character like Fox with you who is like this like super who's immune to radiation, actually likes it, and he's smart. And you're like, well, my question at the original part at the end of the game was like, why can't Fox go in there and do it? Like he would do it. He knows how to do it. And they had to go back and like change that in the DLC because everybody was like, this ending makes no sense. But it was like, this is the way you have to play the game. And so to me, that's like a fundamentally fascist point of view of storytelling or of interacting with the media. Same thing like it's passive. So I think because this has to purely act in the imagination, that's a big part of it. So it has that kind of element of novels where like the story exists in the mind. The movie, the story exists on the screen and like it's streamed to you. You are experiencing it, and it has that temporal element where like the book is always kind of there. And I think that's the big thing is like the game exists while you're playing it, and you have to be a participant of it. and as opposed to having it delivered to you, or like, like Skyrim exists whether or not I'm playing it or not. Like I can pause the game and walk away from it forever and come back anytime I want to. Where the role-playing game only exists while you're actively playing it. You can talk and the narrative. I can't remember who it was, but someone described like the narrative is like the leftover product of role-playing games. Like that's what you have after you play it. Like that's why we talk about it so much, is that's the only way to regain access to the time we had in playing it, right? So yeah,
and I follow up to that, and I do have an answer to this for myself, but I'd be interested to hear yours. So what is one philosophical or ethical question you find yourself returning to in your own games and campaigns?
I think in Abrax Express was I run an Expanse role-playing game, actual play. We've been playing it now for like 4 years, 5 years. Like I think it's 4 years now, and we have 300 episodes, hundreds of hours of it. And that game, the ethical thing I'm really curious about is how do you the premise is like how do basically like the common people deal with like history unfolding around them. So in the Expanse, we play canonical Expanse, and there's the book series. The books are done, and there's these historical events. But like the universe is a big place, the space is a big place. How do those things all affect the people on like they're just kind of trying to live their lives? So I've been really curious about exploring, like, while we see historical crap fall around us, like, I live in the United States, you live in the UK, like you got like, you got Brexit, we got like Trump, we got whatever. How do we live through that history? How do like that? And that's how I pitch the game to people, is like it's schlubs in space. So it's just about like the common people that, that just kind of like deal with stuff. And how do you deal with that history unfolding around you? What choices do you make based around that? So that's a big theme I really like about it, is just having to like deal with the mess that like the big figures are dealing with, how shit rolls downhill basically. And as far as ethical stuff goes, yeah, I mean, and that game is very ethical because it's very much like it's on the frontiers of humanity and space on new planets, and there's a lot of issues of how we kind of deal with all that stuff. But that's a big one, I think, is how do we live with history and how do we live through it, and especially being like aware of it, and where do we find our place in it is a big one for me. I think that's one of my favorite ones to delve into.
Yeah. For me, it's about like simplicity and the way humans prefer simplicity, and exploring, can you ever be good in a system that's bad? So a totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist regime, because so many role-playing games set up the objective good guys as having structures of government that we have discarded as bad. So if you think about 40k, if you think about Warhammer, if you think about so many Dungeons and Dragons, they're in absolute monarchies, they're in monarchies, they're not in what we would consider free and fair regimes. And then and then you overlay on that in some worlds, like in 40k, they're like, but the Imperium are the bad guys. I'm like, yeah, they are, but you've also got Chaos, who you've objectively made worse. So there's when you're a kid, a boy, a girl, a kid going into a Games Workshop store, the people in that store aren't like, right, so 40k, the guys wearing the bad guys,
the guys wearing the laurels are clearly the good guy.
Yeah, right. So I'm like, those two things are really confusing, and lead to this ethical question, philosophical question of being good in a bad system.
Right.
So
why are you making me bring up Moorcock again? So this is like no, seriously. So this is one of the early issues with like D&D, is that, and what Moorcock's biggest contribution to Dungeons and Dragons, aside from like the notion of law and chaos, but is in Moorcock's books, and why the Eternal Champion saga is so good, is that neither law nor chaos is privileged. And the problem is that in Warhammer, what Games Workshop gets wrong is they privilege the Space Marines, they privilege the Imperium. And so that's kind of one of the things that's really fascinating, is this notion of like, well, no one's privileged. And in Dungeons & Dragons, at the core, initially, neither good nor evil is privileged. You didn't have like, the spell was, the spells weren't like, it was really interesting because it wasn't like now we have like pro evil or whatever, but it's like it used to be protection from good or evil. It was the same thing for either one. It could do the opposite either way. And I always liked that lack of privileging. And And I think that's an interesting, that's an element where a lot of these games where they really want to clearly accept the good guys versus these guys. Like, so like in Werewolf, why, the werewolves are clearly privileged, like in terms of like more morally. But that was kind of the beauty of Vampire. It's like, well, like, it's what's it's a little more nebulous. So I think that's a really interesting element. Yeah.
Yeah, we've reached the end. We've got a few questions left over, but we'll save them if you ever want to come back on.
If you want to shoot me afterwards, I'll be happy to I'll try to take a shot at them on Blue Sky or something like that too.
Thank you.
Or
that would be amazing.
we could maybe I'll make a video or something like that.
Yeah,
but yeah,
only
that's cool.
if you feel you've got time. There's just 3 left, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and to hear your unique view on TTRPGs. And remember, we've got the discount link that John shared that we will share on the Discord server, so please do check out his stuff. And thanks again, John.
Yeah, this was fun. I'd love to come back and talk about whatever. Andy, you were quiet.
It's true. Sorry, my computer's going haywire. I've had an exam board thing all day today, and I'll be honest, my brain is pretty much scrambled eggs right now. So
Andy's doing all the links in the comments for me today, and I'm leaving him in
I got
peace.
told to watch out. I got told to watch out. Andy was the one saying he was excited for this. So I was waiting for him. I felt like he was sizing me up, and he was going to strike when the coals were hot, and really get me on something like that, and get you a gotcha moment, or tell me I'm full of crap and.
It's more just multitasking was causing me
to
get a blue screen crash in here. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. And thanks as always to everyone in the chat. You've been great. Thank you to our lovely Discord community and our patrons. Our patrons keep these gloriously ad-free throughout, so you can watch it, rewatch it uninterrupted. And all that remains for me to say is thank you. See you again next week for another Inside the Rookery. Until then, goodbye and caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.
Later.